All right, everyone, welcome, welcome. We're so glad that you're here on behalf of the Society for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Business. My name is Amy Smith, and I welcome you. This is our second session of our Diversity Deep Dive series, and today we are graced with the presence of Ms. Tiara Chesmer of Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. She's going to bring you a lot of great insights, but before we get to her, we just want to give a grand overview of what today is going to look like while folks continue to trickle in. A little bit about SDEIB. We are a new organization within the School of Business here at Georgia State. We were founded in January this past year, so we are very excited to continue to grow and continue to bring you great programming. Our mission is that we strive to build community through education, empowerment, and networking related to D, E, and I in business. You'll get used to those three letters. You'll hear them a lot from us. Our vision, our really big goal here is to empower future business leaders to celebrate diversity and engage in equitable and inclusive practices. We aren't the experts, but we hope to liaise with the best. We do have a multitude of ways that you can get connected with us. We will be sharing this slideshow after the presentation and encourage you to get connected. We won't have time quite yet, but you'll have access to these slides later. Today's plan, we're going to begin with a moderated conversation between our guest, Ms. Tiara Chesmer, and one of our board members, Treasurer Edwards. Following that moderated conversation, we would love to hear from the audience. So please get a pad and pen, jot down those questions that you may have evolving in your brain, and we would love to hear you contribute those. We'll hear again later from Camera, one of our other board members, about how to engage with Q&A, but we will be welcoming you to unmute to participate. But also, if that's uncomfortable for you, you are welcome to chime in the chat. So either of those methods are great. Stay tuned for the Q&A portion. Finally, we do want to also include some reflection. We're going to have a reflective share out at the end in our final few minutes together. Here, we would love for you to be pondering throughout, what are the big aha moments for you? What are some big takeaways? What's something that you want to go explore further? Again, pad and pen might be great, useful tool for you to just keep track of those thoughts, because we'll love to hear your ideas at that stage. In today's session, some norms and expectations that we would appreciate you following. First and foremost, assume best intentions. When engaging in these conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it can be a little uncomfortable. That's the point. You should have discomfort to have growth. But we want to make sure that across the board with each other, we are assuming best intentions. Please do keep your camera on if possible. This is intended to be an engaged, interactive session. Especially during the Q&A portion, we want to hear from you. You're not just here as a wallflower. We want you to be involved. Hold your questions until that latter portion of the session, please, at which point camera, as I said, will open up and be ready to process those. Finally, kindly remain muted unless you're called upon during that Q&A portion so that we don't get distracted by background noise. At this point, it's my pleasure to introduce our primary guest speaker today, Ms. Tiara Chesmer. Tiara Chesmer is currently a Vice President and Regional Diversity Officer for the Southeast region of Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. As the RDO, she is responsible for providing internal leadership on issues of institutional diversity, equity, and inclusion. She ensures accountability for inclusive excellence through the implementation and assessment of strategic diversity initiatives by all managers and wealth management employees. Ms. Chesmer provides oversight for an operational budget and oversees diversity planning and programming activities within the Southeast region and beyond. Tiara excels in strategic partnering and uses her relationships to plan, recruit, and build a diverse leadership pipeline. Tiara develops and supports Morgan Stanley's diverse population by coaching, diagnosing, and resolving organizational challenges. Prior to joining Morgan Stanley, Tiara was a senior financial manager at Blackstone in New York, serving the private equity and hedge fund verticals for over 8 years. Tiara attended New York University and graduated cum laude with a degree in finance and business management. Tiara has also obtained a diversity and inclusion certificate from Cornell University. She's an active member of the Association of Black and Hispanic Business Students and sits on the Council for Inclusive Excellence. After living in New York for 14 years and Atlanta for 3, Tiara currently calls Fort Lauderdale, Florida, home. Next up, I'm pleased to introduce our guest moderator, one of our lovely board members here at SDEIB. Treasure Edwards joined Morgan Stanley in 2012 as an intern in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and is now the Senior Regional Analyst for the Southeast region, having been at the firm nearly 10 years. Prior to her current position, she held the position of Complex Administrator for the Atlanta Buckhead Complex for 4 years. In that role, her responsibilities included the PWM and Wealth Management offices in Atlanta, Buckhead, and in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with 400 plus employees. Following her internship, Treasure was a part of the 2013 cohort of the Wealth Management Branch Analyst Program, completing business-specific rotations within the firm that include operations and service, risk and compliance, and business development. She holds the Series 7, 66, 9, and 10 licenses. With a passion for diversity, recruiting, and mentoring, she currently sits on the Emerging Leaders Advisory Council under the Institute for Inclusion, the Atlanta Diversity Council, and manages communications for Women in Wealth of Atlanta. Treasure received a Bachelor's of Science in Finance with a specialization in professional sales and marketing from the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa in 2012, and is currently pursuing her MBA with a concentration in organization management here at Robinson College of Business. She and her husband, Kennard, love to travel the world and consider themselves amateur foodies. They currently live in Brookhaven, Georgia, although she is a proud Atmore, Alabama native. With that, I'm happy to pass the torch on to Ms. Treasure and to hear our great insights from Tiara Chesmer. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Amy. I did just lose power, just as an FYI, but I think I'm good. It is storming a little bit outside. So welcome everyone on the call. I'm gonna just dive right in. So welcome, Tiara.
Thank you, Treasure.
I want to kind of start off, Tiara, if you would, talk about what your role looks like in a regional diversity officer, how that role may have shifted, because there's been a lot of discussion around diversity over the last year, 18 months. And then lastly, if you could differentiate your role from that of a role in HR.
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, thanks for having me. Amy, thank you for the kind introduction for both me and Treasure. So a day in the life of an RDO, and I have to warn, so hopefully I won't overload you with acronyms because we have about 1,200 at Morgan Stanley, but RDO stands for Regional Diversity Officer. A day in the life. Wow, where did it begin? We do a lot of stuff. So I think where I'll start is conversations with our managers around accountability. We do judge on a metrics-based system at Morgan Stanley around representation, teaming, and growing NAA, which is net acquired assets. Beyond that, we, like Amy said in my bio, we do a ton around strategic partnering. So ensuring that we are connecting with the communities that we serve. As Amy mentioned, I serve the entire Southeast region. So my biggest markets are Georgia and Florida. So really making those connections with community organizations that center around diversity, that center around bridging wealth gaps, so on and so forth, because there are very market specific areas. So obviously Buckhead differs a ton from, let's say, West Virginia. So we have to be very intentional about our partnerships. We do a ton around development of our current diverse population. So I do have an operational budget that I manage and I allocate to our diverse employees. So let's say a financial advisor comes to me and they say, Tiara, I have an amazing client prospect, but I don't have the funds to take him to a lavish dinner or to wine and dine him. I would give that diverse FA the money to do so. Or another instance of development is, let's say they wanted to work on something around pitching their value proposition to a new client, and they needed some help and training around that. I would pay for that training as well. So there's a number of ways that I use that budget. Beyond those things, obviously Morgan Stanley is involved in a ton of different conferences where we, tell our DEI story and recruit, as well as looking and managing different internships. One of our best ones is what Treasure came into Morgan Stanley through, which is our branch analyst program. So very high level, but that's a day in the life. To differentiate my position from HR, hopefully I don't offend anyone with an HR background, but I characterize it as HR being a little bit scary, or more of that really, really corporate muscle to keep things in order and to keep everybody safe, really. Where I call diversity, or my role, as more of a safe place. So folks can come to me. I'm an extension of HR, but I am not HR. You can come to me and we can have these candid conversations about things that you may be experiencing in the workplace, and really more centered around diversity. So whether it be, an issue around race, gender, orientation, age discrimination, a myriad of things, but really, really more intentional around diversity.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff. And I know Tiara does a lot of things and wears a lot of hats. And so one of the things I do want to go back to that you mentioned is intentional. So many of us on the call or just kind of hearing about everything DE&I, this is a word we keep hearing more and more about. Would you speak to how you think Morgan Stanley, and even I would say you in your role, are very intentional with everything DE&I?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like being intentional is the center of success in diversity and inclusion within our team. You have to be intentional around the partnerships that you're creating, especially in this day and age with everything that's going around social justice, around discrimination at its height at the moment. Everyone wants to get involved and everyone has a great idea. So you have to be very selective in that process of picking the right things that's going to serve not only your populations, but the populations within our organization, but also our clients, because they mean so much to us. Intentional around the type of training that we have. One big initiative that we had this year was training around unconscious bias and inclusive leadership. I think those are so important to learn about, especially as it relates to onboarding and hiring practices. We also looked at, for the first time last year, we had an external company come in and look at our pay gaps. So between women, between people of color, those exist and they need to be addressed. So we were very intentional about bridging some of those gaps and closing some of those gaps. And lastly, for the first time, Morgan Stanley released their diversity and inclusion representation numbers. We knew that we would be scrutinized for this, but we also know it's important so people can see that we are making progress and this is a priority of our organization.
No, absolutely. And I'll just say that I actually took the trainings that you mentioned, and they were even eye-opening for me, right? Some things that I didn't necessarily know that I might have been doing. And so all of our managers had to take those, and even our financial advisors were also invited. So that's very helpful. I even raised my hand on those.
Yeah. Everyone
you also talked.
Sorry.
Oh yeah. No. I even might share, Amy, after the call, if we could share, there's this website that has these little tests on are you biased and in these different categories, and it is very eye-opening. So maybe that's one we can add after.
Yeah, the Harvard implicit association tests. Yeah.
I always say the best rule of thumb is, if you think you don't have any bias, either ask your spouse or your partner or your best friend. They'll know your biases.
Yeah, if you think you don't have any biases, you do. I think that's more of it.
Absolutely. One other thing, Tiara, that you mentioned at the top of the call in your introduction, excuse me, is about metrics. If you could talk a little bit about how Morgan Stanley and how the DE&I team measures impact, measures how well you all are doing, and then along these lines, how are our leaders held accountable in that space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say that diversity is a tough job because it's a balance between heart, passion, and mind. But there is power in the data, so you got to look at the data. So we measure we measure and hold our managers accountable to a certain set of metrics. Our managers are actually compensated on these metrics or penalized if they don't make certain goals. So those are representation of Black and Hispanic women, because women are considered diverse within our business, as well as any other person of color, so Indian, Asian, so on and so forth. So representation, teaming. So how are these managers setting their employees up for success and teaming them with senior advisors to help them grow their practice? And lastly, what I mentioned was NAA. So how are they helping these financial advisors, new and old, diverse financial advisors, grow their business? So are they helping them get new leads on clients? Are they helping them in their development to pitch to clients? All of those things our managers are held accountable to. We also have a DEI steering committee. So the very tops, the leads of our organization. So the head of wealth management, the head of wealth management, diversity and inclusion, our global diversity and inclusion individual, as well as our CEO, sit on this steering committee, and they talk about our goals and initiatives, and they set goals for our manager population. So we need to make sure that we're not only recruiting diverse folks into management and our C-suite, but also we're promoting within and developing our talent to pipeline into those management positions. So a few of those touch on accountability in Morgan Stanley.
I love what you said. I just jotted this down. Heart, passion, and mind. I'm going to take that. I think that is a really, really good representation of high level what you actually do every day. I love that.
Thank you.
You alluded to this a little bit in your last comments about the highest leaders in our organization, how they're having these conversations. And I really think that speaks to the culture here at our firm. Can you talk a little bit about what our culture is at our organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually want to take a step back and do a little bit of a comparison. So as Amy mentioned in my bio, I was part of a firm for almost 9 years, Blackstone, amazing organization on the institutional side of the business. I had nothing but great times there, but I did see a lack of the diversity messaging coming from the top down. So when I came to Morgan Stanley Wealth Management and I was invited to this conference called the Multicultural Leadership Conference, I wasn't initially in a diversity role just yet. It really turned me on to, bringing more people that look like myself, women of color, into this business. And I saw that Morgan Stanley put together this large scale national conference for all of our diverse employees to talk about, business growth, the state of our business, networking, and, some fun stuff too. I think the first one that we had Common, the rapper, come on, perform and have a fireside chat. This year, we had Tracy Ellis Ross. So some fun stuff too, but I just really saw that the commitment was there, and that really speaks to our culture at Morgan Stanley. I categorize our culture in 3 different parts: uplifting, accessible, and growing. I think we're a work in progress, like any organization, especially any large organization. I always say that diversity is definitely a marathon, not a race. We need to take those subtle steps to make sure that everyone is inclusive and feels comfortable on this journey together. So. Oh, you're on mute, Treasure. There we go.
What about now? Am I off mute, guys?
You're good.
Apologies. I also attended the Multicultural Leadership Conference in 2015. Was my very first time ever attending that, and it was here in Atlanta actually then. And those meetings, you know, like hopefully these calls, get you guys energized and just super, you know, impactful in how you're talking about everything DE&I. So I love that. So speaking of us being on a journey, right? You talked about diversity is not something that just happens overnight. It is over time. Can you speak a little bit about some of the specific activations that have, you know, done really well, you know, within our organizations, and where some opportunity lies for us?
Yeah, one thing that I want to speak on specifically is something that has not happened yet. It's happening at the end of this month, but Treasure was a huge part in putting it together. So I want to make sure I give credit where credit is due. And this is actually the best part about my role, is having the ability to give exposure to our diverse population, and putting them in rooms with folks that they normally wouldn't have the opportunity to do so. So this program is called Emerge, and it's actually an internal program, but it is for our new financial advisors, new diverse financial advisors, and financial advisor associates. What they're going to do is they're going to get on a Zoom full of senior advisors who are looking to team with them, and they get to do their 3-minute value proposition. But this gives them an opportunity to network in this, you know, this COVID environment where they normally wouldn't have the chance to, but also regionally. So a person in Buckhead could possibly team with a person in Alabama or Orlando, or whatever the case may be. So I know we're probably Zoom fatigued, but this is the one benefit of still having the Zoom platform. Another thing that I'm really excited about, specifically around this activation, is that we're having a presentation from an external organization around the power of diverse teams. So they're going to talk about, you know, the power of diversity. So age, gender, orientation, ethnicity, so on. Just having those different ideas and perspectives, and giving that business justification behind it, those dollar signs, to really convince these financial advisors that this is where it's at. Some other programs that I'm really happy that the firm was involved in is our HBCU Scholars Program, where we are paying full tuition, room and board for 5 students each year from 3 different colleges. No matter their major. So they can major in nursing or science or whatever the case may be. We don't ask that they go into finance or business or anything like that. But we also pair them up with a local mentor and school ambassador as well, just to make sure that they have that person of contact to help them through. And then obviously a little selfishly, with hopes that they have a little interest in wealth management and they want to come join us as well. I'm trying to think what else. Something during the height of, you know, racial justice movement last year was our ability to really bounce back, respond, but internally have these conversations around race, these candid conversations. And I was so proud of the firm for holding these discussions. One part that really stood out to me was when Mandel Crawley, who used to be our head of private wealth management, but now he is our global HR leader. He's a Black male, and he gave the example of, yes, I am this high figure within Morgan Stanley, and everyone respects me within this organization, and so on, and I make a lot of money, but when I step out of the walls of Morgan Stanley, I'm just a regular Black man. And I think that was an eye opener for so many people on the call that have just begun their diversity journey, to hear that. And they heard from other people on the call as well about just these personalized stories, and experiences. And I was so proud of the firm for hosting something like that.
No, and as was I. I'll just say to everyone on the call, I've been at Morgan Stanley for 10 years. It's the only company that I've ever worked for. I was right out of college. And I do think there's definitely been more of a shift in having these uncomfortable, discussions, right? And I've even over the last year been feeling more comfortable having those difficult discussions. An example, I would never wear my hair curly on any work event. And then, over the last year, I've been having certain conversations where I can be who I naturally am, right? And I know Tiara may actually mention this in a couple of moments about that. But I would just say as well, overall, the culture is very welcoming. We have a long way to go still, but we have definitely made some, forward movement there.
It's funny that you say that, Treasure, because anytime that I put folks on a panel, similar to this or a conference or anything like that, I always have these prep calls ahead of the panel, and I always make sure, please take off your corporate hat. I want you to be your authentic self. I want you to be comfortable. Please don't wear a tie. Don't intimidate our crowd. Like, just be yourself. We're all humans. We're all individuals that make up this amazing organization. So if you don't shine through with yourself, then we're just blah. So.
Love that. I want to go back to Tiara, to something you mentioned about getting folks in the room, right? And that's something that I think we as an organization can sometimes struggle with, is making sure the exposure is there. Can you talk about some specific, job opportunities? Or I know a lot of the folks on this call I'm sure that's one reason why they actually joined the call, to hear specifically about some different job opportunities that we have in wealth management.
Yeah, I think such a big part of my role and my team is to make sure that folks know about the opportunities within wealth management, because when they think about it, they're like, oh, financial advisor, no interest in that. I know I don't have any interest in becoming a financial advisor. But obviously there is that role if you are, that sales oriented, love convincing people, relationships, all that. So there's that role. But there's so many more. You could be a marketing person, a social media person within a financial advisor team. We have service organization positions where you're helping with like account setups and stuff like that. We have business development where you're thinking of great ideas to help financial advisors develop their own book of business. We have regional positions like treasurer in an analyst position. We have financial literacy group that focuses strictly on bridging wealth gaps and providing resources around financial literacy. We have something super attractive like sports and entertainment, where you can go in and mix and mingle with celebs and athletes and whatnot, and help them on their financial journey. So there's a myriad of different resources, different opportunities within wealth management. One that I also want to highlight is the one that Treasure came in through, which is our branch analyst program. I love this program because we have it for summer, and then we have it for rising seniors. And what it is it's a rotational program where you're really getting exposure to all facets of our business. So you have time in risk and service and business development. You have time with a manager, time with a financial advisor. So you can really narrow it down to what's most attractive to you, where your skill sets lie, and really get to know the firm as well and make those relationships so you're hired full time and find the role of your dreams.
I love that. And one other thing I'll just mention, and we can share this on after the call as well. All job opportunities are on our Morgan Stanley job bank. I believe it's Morgan Stanley morganstanley.com/careers. And so you can take a look on there. If you're open to relocating, we are, worldwide organization. So, definitely take a look at that. Even other business units, if you will, other than wealth management, are listed on there too. Okay, well, I think we're coming up on time, but I want to ask one more thing. Tiara, if you could, we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about opportunities. We've talked about culture at the firm. We've talked about DE&I as a whole. If there was some advice you could give to folks on the call today about how they can be mindful about adding impact within their own organizations, and really how to articulate their competitive advantage, because like you said, we're trying to get into the rooms. We have advocates like you who are helping us get into those rooms, into those conversations. Once we're in the room, how do we articulate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the organization part, I think it goes back to being intentional. There's so many ideas floating out there, and it goes back to me being very intentional about the partnerships that I select and all of those things. But every issue doesn't need a whole council. Every issue doesn't need money thrown at it. Sometimes you got to start within and make sure that the organization is inclusive first. So start with that training, like the ones that I mentioned around inclusive leadership, unconscious bias, and roll out those initiatives slowly so everybody's comfortable. As far as the question as it relates to getting in the room, I will live and die by being your authentic self. So many organizations are craving diversity right now. I'll be very candid with you. Diversity professionals I'm being poached left and right, as I'm sure my peers are as well. Which is good and bad, because you struggle with, am I being poached because I'm a diverse person, or am I being poached because of my talent? You struggle, but you want to come into the room and be your authentic self. You need to shine through with what makes you unique and what makes you different, and bring those different perspectives and ideas to the table, and don't be afraid to do so, because if someone shames you for being unique and different, then that's not the right organization for you. I promise you.
I love that. I think that is a perfect time for us to shift. So I'm going to pass the call over to Camera, and she's going to let you all know how we can get engaged here. All you, Camera.
Awesome. Thank you, Treasure. This was such an insightful conversation. I hope that you guys enjoyed. I have a list of questions, but before we jump into the Q&A, I do want to remind you all on the call that we absolutely want to hear from you. If you feel comfortable, please feel free to raise your hand and I will instruct you to come off of mute and ask your question live, or you can post your question in the chat and I will read them aloud. Tiara, I have a question and I'll go ahead and kick it off.
Yeah.
So mental health is something that I'm super passionate about. And I know on the call you've talked at length about how diversity is a marathon, not a sprint, and we're very early on in this journey. Does it ever become overwhelming, all of the unlearning, uncovering everything that needs to be changing, coming up with solutions? And if so, how do you manage that feeling? How do you manage the overwhelming part of it?
Cameron, I'm so glad that you asked this question. So first and foremost, I would love to mention that mental health is such a priority for Morgan Stanley. We've put a lot of dollars and energy into this space, especially with everything that's happened with COVID and folks just being overwhelmed. I know my workload in the past 2 years has probably tripled. So we invested in a platform called Lyra, where it's basically mental health coaching. And every employee at Morgan Stanley gets 6 sessions. So I've definitely taken advantage of that. But also we have an on-site today, and I actually left that to come speak here. But we had an exercise where we talked about our one thing that gives us a break from what we're overwhelmed with within this role. And I always said, and you're gonna laugh, but I love to work out, but I have to find the time to do it. So whenever I have a 2 hour break or an hour break, whether it be early in the morning or in the middle of the day, I take that time to work out, just because it's a stress reliever for me. But I have to make sure, this is the funny part, I have to make sure that I don't have a Zoom meeting right after, because I sweat like a man and I'll look a hot mess. So I have to make sure. So I just get it in where I can.
And I have that problem too.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you for your answer.
Of course.
Pranshu has his hand raised, so I will give you the mic, Pranshu.
Hello, Tiara. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you for an amazing session today, right?
Thank you.
I did have a quick question though. So all of us, like, being in the board for the SDA, we are quite familiar with what bias is and,
Mhm.
how to unravel or cover up all the mental biases that we have against people at times, right? But for someone who's quite new to it, right, what would
Mhm.
be the starting point to uh, you know self-explore and introspect and kind of get rid of more of the biases that we generally tend to develop over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely take Treasure's advice and take that quiz. So hopefully she shares that with all of you. But it's something that I mentioned before. If you don't think you have biases or want to find out some of what they are, ask your best friend or your partner or your spouse, because they will 1,000% know what your biases are. And they can be as simple as, I prefer blue over green, but you have these biases and you need to figure out what they are. Um, I know for me, even before I got into diversity, I thought about, so I'm biracial. So I thought about, whether I identify better with my white counterparts or my black counterparts, and I really discovered some biases there. I discovered a ton. So you just got to dig a little deeper, ask the questions, and really fill out yourself.
Thank you. Thank
You're
you for
welcome.
answering.
Awesome. Amy has a question.
Yep.
Yes, thank you so much. I love all the insights. I actually have like 5 questions, but I'll do one at a time. The first one is something I'm particularly sensitive to as a white person in the DE&I space.
Mm-hmm.
I heard so much about what you were saying that it's really important to create a safe space, right? And to be inclusive, you have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So my question to you is kind of what that looks like. How do you go about creating a space and structure? To give some context here, like my understanding is that y'all have some affinity groups,
Mm-hmm.
but is there also value in broader sessions? And through all of this, I want to just include a little footnote here. I'm particularly interested in how we explicitly educate white folks without burdening individuals of color, because I think that is something, it shouldn't need to be a panel of people of color sitting in the front of the room to a bunch of white folks being like, let's tell our story, because that is just not how, but I don't know. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, what you've tried, what's worked, what hasn't been as successful. Like, what is your mindset about that?
Yeah, so I'll first say that I know I've heard from a lot of folks of color, and they've come to me specifically and said, I'm so tired of them asking my opinion just because I'm the only black person in the room. I'm not a representation of all black people. I'm not a representation of all Asian people, or whatever the case may be. So I'm glad you brought up that question. And I've had these conversations. So obviously, I'm one person covering an entire region. So when I hold these trainings and stuff, I try to make it more of a smaller setting where I'm speaking to maybe the highest level manager and it trickles down. And I make that very intentional because, like I said, if this messaging is not coming from the top down, then it's worthless because no one's going to listen to the bottom of the totem pole. Let's be honest. So when I have these conversations, we talk about things like, the trainings that we went over with, but also we have to create a space in our white counterparts need to create a space where they're being more open-minded and looking at this from a human perspective and focusing more on our similarities than our differences. So I preach that all the time. I've had so many instances from a hiring perspective where a manager will say, well, give me an excuse like, well, that person doesn't know Excel or they're not licensed, so why would I hire them? Because they have the skill set that you cannot train. Excel is teachable. You can get your licenses, but this person could sail water to a whale. So what are we doing here? So I really have to put things in perspective for folks. I do love those listening sessions because they get to hear and get those perspectives, but at the same time, I don't want that to be the only platform where our white counterparts are learning and getting their journey from, or starting their journey.
So just to follow up on that really quick, do you
Yeah.
have like a sort of database of resources at the ready? So when you do have someone saying, I really want to learn more about this, I'm eager to hear more about this perspective, so that they can, a white person can do that without burdening. Do you have like a bank of resources that you use?
Yeah, so we definitely roll out different trainings and things of that nature where folks have the opportunity to sign up. We mandate these type of training for managers, but the rest of our employees, it's optional. So we do have something like a bank of sorts, but honestly, folks aren't going to sit through an hour and a half Zoom being talked at. You know what I mean? So I prefer more engaging conversations and talking things through rather than shoving some training down their throat. Main reason why today I didn't use any slides. I never use slides. I would much rather talk with an audience than talk at them.
Thank you, Amy and Tiara. I have a question in the chat. How would someone incorporate DEI in their recruitment processes?
I think it starts with uncovering those biases first and checking those at the door. Actually, let me clarify. Are you asking you as the recruiter or you being recruited?
Let me see. They're probably
See if they answer.
You as the recruiter.
Okay, yeah. So definitely checking those biases at the door and learning what your biases are, so you're not bringing those into the interview process. I think another thing is looking at those, exactly what I just said around those skill sets that cannot be taught and those that can be taught. You need to dig a little deeper and really look at those qualities. One story I know right off the back is I had this young lady who was a relationship manager at Bank of America. I sourced her through so many individuals through our organization, and they all said the same thing. She doesn't have a license. Finally, I linked her with someone, and they said, I cannot believe that everyone passed on this amazing, woman. Like she is killing it. I know she'll be great for our business. And, that just further let me know that we have a lot of work to do in the recruiting and interview process. Because why? Just that why. And like I said so many times, it is a marathon, not a race. But we're slowly chipping away at uncovering some of these things that we need to figure out.
Awesome. I think that is it. I do have one more question, so I'll give everyone time to trot one more in before we move to the reflections.
Sure.
So again, you mentioned that diversity is a marathon, not a sprint. It will never be like completely finished, right? There will always be work to do. But what is like the ultimate end goal? Maybe if you could wrap it up in three things, what are three things you would love to see change across your industry or across industries across the board for staple improvements that could be attributed to DE?
Yeah, to my industry specifically, I would say one, I want to see more representation, diverse representation in manager positions. So really the leaders of our firm, and externally as well. I know other wealth management and finance organizations have the same problems that Morgan Stanley do. So definitely more diverse representation at the C-suite and maybe VP and above level. I would like to see more pipelining. So everyone wants a whale, but they don't want the fish. Well, we need to invest in the fish so we can build more whales. So I definitely want to see that. And then lastly, we are a wealth management organization, and we have that responsibility to serve the communities that to represent the communities that we serve. So I really want to chip away at wealth gaps and teaching more around financial wellness in underserved communities. So we do that now, but I want to see more of it.
Awesome. And lastly, Christy George is interested in applying for the Technology Summer Analyst Program for 2022.
Yep.
She would like to know, what is the interview process like?
I don't run that program just because I think that's on, I'm not sure if it's wealth management or institutional, but it is within a different business unit. It's technology. But normally what those look like is you apply, they'll do a screening with a recruiter, and then you'll meet with the hiring manager or representative of their team. And go from there. But if you want to shoot Treasure and I a quick note and let us know your name, maybe we can put in a plug.
Awesome. All right. Now we will move into our reflections. And this is just an opportunity for the audience to share aha moments, key takeaways, inspiration, or things that you want to explore further as a result of this wonderful conversation today. So I will share mine first. And I think it really spawned from that conversation, from my initial question, to consider the one thing. And then the point that Treasure highlighted as well, the heart, the mind, and the passion, fusing those three together, really considering that to be like the crux of what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like. And then considering the one thing that just kind of centers you and helps you to focus when faced with overwhelming opportunities or overwhelming situations. So those are my key takeaways. And audience, you guys can feel free to come off of mute and share. I know Tiara would love to hear an immediate impact of her conversation today. And also feel free to share that in the chat, and I can read them aloud.
I'll share while folks are typing. What really resonated with me, Tiara, when you were talking, responding to my question about, how to build in opportunities for white folks to learn, was really about emphasizing the human perspective, right? And teaching people to see humanity, right? And looking for similarities without losing track of differences, right? Because that is the beauty of diversity, but really leveraging that human perspective hit me. And I saw it as a really great way forward with this kind of work.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any insights they would like to share before we close?
I'll share one thing. Sorry, I know I spoke most of the call, but Tiara and I work together a lot, and I would just say she is such an advocate of always allowing me to be in the room, right? And I know we talked about that a little bit, and always, giving me opportunities to gain exposure. And I really like what you said. I'm all about quotes. I actually do a newsletter every week that I have something called Word to the Wise. And when you said everybody wants a whale, but not everybody wants fish, I love that. I'm going to put that in the newsletter this week. And it really just speaks to, you can't start so high level, right? Like you have to, how you were mentioning, have a pipeline for our future leaders. And so, you know, that was one of the things I also took away.
Awesome.
Treasure, you make it easy.
And one more that I would share was when you said be your authentic self. And I think this is something that everyone on the call can relate to. Like being in the job market is tough. And especially tough when you have skill sets and your resume reflects that. And you get rejections back and forth and you start to question. I've had this conversation with friends and family. I'm like, it's no way they read this resume and they don't pull me in for an interview. And I have the conversations just frankly, like, should I just put that I'm white on the application? And those are the conversations that I've been having. It's difficult, just trying to think about if I want to show up in that space, the place that I want to be in is to show up as my authentic self. So to know that there are people in those positions that advocate for people that look like me and other people of color, to be our authentic selves, to show our value and to vocalize that and be confident in that and not feel like you have to assimilate or hide yourself, even down to the curly hair. I would have straightened my hair in so many other instances. So that was also a key takeaway, like to continue to be who you are and the opportunities that are for you will be presented.
Absolutely, Camera. And I'll actually share something that I did before I was a diversity professional. So I know you guys have Tiara Chesmer, but it's actually hyphenated Tiara Chesmer Williams. And I used to only use Tiara Williams, and I realized I was not getting hired because people really thought that was an African American name, or at least I assumed so. So I always just used Tiara Chesmer, but now I hyphenate my name and use both. So
thank you for sharing.
mm-hmm.
Awesome. Amy, I will toss it back to you.
All right. Thanks, Camera. Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to touch base as we close things out, remind you that we have a multitude of ways for you to stay in touch. You can reach us with our Gmail, sdeib.rcb@gmail.com. We also have a GroupMe where we can engage in some safe place conversations, and we'll promote our events through there. You can follow us on Instagram or Twitter. We have a LinkedIn page, and we're also in the GSU Network pin. So after this presentation, we are going to share out these slides with everyone. We'll also share the recording and a feedback form. As we mentioned in today, we'll also be including a link to the Harvard Project Implicit Association tests to check your own bias. I actually recently just did that for a class, and it's enlightening. It's really powerful. And there's a multitude of tests that you can take. And we'll also share a link to the Morgan Stanley job opportunities that we discussed today. I also want to take this time to plug our next event. We're super excited to be continuing this diversity deep dive session. We hope that you found today enlightening. The next session promises to be as well. We actually have 3 distinct representatives from Truist coming in, and that will be Wednesday, October 27th. When we follow up with you in a couple days, we'll also include some registration links for that next event so you can stay in touch with our diversity deep dive series. With that, on behalf of SDEIB, I want to give a heartfelt thanks to Tiara Chesmer Williams for giving us such great insights and just really candid perspectives on what you do, and just really opening yourself up. We so appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Take great care, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Tiara.